Okay.
Okay.
So first of all, I wanted to thank you, Alicia, for joining us today. Really appreciate you being here with us. Our goal here at Mind Plus Neurology is to not only give our members an exceptional clinical experience, but also be here to support you in other ways that can benefit your overall health and well-being. So as a part of our wellness workshop series, we have different hosts that may pop in from time to time. Um, and we just thank Alicia for being our guest host for this one. So it's really awesome. I'm so excited. Um, we also have other types of groups outside of wellness workshops that Mind Plus offers to our members. One is called Mindful Connections, which is a support group that meets every other month. Okay, I'm going to just get Caitlin in. Okay. Hello. And we are also going to be unveiling a new series called Mindful Movement. That's going to be coming up at the end of this month, and it involves some yoga, so everybody can work on their yoga skills, but it'll be gentle, so we won't take it too hard on you. And we'll also be working on breath work with that series as well. So some meditation type of breathing techniques will be involved in mindful connections. Mindful movement. So many mindfulness. So that's coming up. So you guys got the first hearing of it. So all right. So I guess that pretty much wraps it up. Alicia, you're going to give us your cooking step-by-step instructions on how to make your 2 recipes, SB&J smoothie and the wiping chicken chili. So that
Yes.
we're off to the races.
These are two of my some of my most popular recipes from my first cookbook. Even online, I see people make these all the time. There's actually lots of different ways you can make it, so I'll go through that today. I even had to make some substitutions myself because I couldn't find some of the ingredients. So I'll walk you through all of that today so you can really make it your own. And feel free to stop me along the way. I know everyone's muted right now, but I love it when people ask questions and get really involved. So if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me.
And
I'm
I'll
happy
interrupt
to
you.
answer them.
I'll
Okay,
interrupt you.
perfect. Yes,
So also if
that's
somebody
perfect.
has a question, but maybe they don't feel like it's the right time to jump in, or if they're maybe just like a little bit shy, you can just pop into the chat here in Teams, and then I can raise the hand for you. So
Yes, that's perfect. I'm also like 3 weeks away from my due date, so I may get a little out of breath as I talk a lot. So I'm okay. Don't worry about me. But yeah, I may have to sit down throughout. But you know what? This is a good example of how to cook with migraine because we are not always feeling our best. And a lot of times we have to sit down to do this stuff. So, I'm hopeful that you guys will commiserate in all trying to cook while we have all these different symptoms. So, with that being said, let's get started. We're going to start on the white bean chicken chili, especially because that has to simmer for a while. So, I feel like that's the best one to start with, and then we'll finish with the smoothie, and I'll kind of show you how to build a smoothie and different ingredients and substitutions that you can make. But with this white bean chicken chili, it's a very popular recipe. And what I love about it is you can make it dairy free or with dairy. It's automatically gluten free. It's really easy to prep ahead and freeze. It's full of protein. You could even make it vegetarian by just using all beans, adding a few more vegetables to it. So it's really, really customizable to whatever you want to do. The flavors do develop over the course of, the longer you simmer it, as well as the course of a day. So it's one of those things that, if you want to make it like tonight and have it tomorrow for lunch, it would be really, really lovely. Generally with migraine, so there is kind of an issue with an amino acid called tyramine. And basically, we've known that it can be a somewhat common migraine trigger. A lot of migraine diets avoid it, including the one my cookbook follows. And so the issue with that is this amino acid tends to build up in foods that age. So it's really high in foods like aged cheese, aged meats, that sort of thing. But it can also happen in leftovers. So for this wiping chicken chili, I usually give it about 2 to 3 days. I do have some readers who are super sensitive. They can't go over like 2 days with things. But if you are finding yourself not finishing it all within those 2 to 3 days, it's really, really easy to freeze. So when you freeze it, it starts from that day you freeze. So this can last in the freezer for like 3 to 6 months and be really, really great. I'm actually going to freeze. I think I'm going to freeze this tonight to have it for postpartum. Um, so it's a great one to meal prep. So we're going to start
Actually,
initially. Oh, yeah.
Alicia, it's me again.
Hi.
Hi. So, yeah, great introduction to that recipe. Thank you for that and kind of giving some of those tips along the way. But I thought if you wouldn't mind just to kind of go in a
Oh,
little bit about your history and your story and how how food and maybe how cooking itself, the act of cooking has helped you along your journey. Just
sure.
to kind of lay that foundation down before we get jump
No,
right in.
I would love to because I just got right in and I forgot to start. So, basically, my name is Alicia Wolf. Some people know me as the Dizzy Cook. Over it's about 7 years now, I was diagnosed with chronic vestibular migraine, and the hard part about that is I went through about like 6 or 7 doctors just to get that diagnosis. And what is a little unique about my type of migraine is it can come with or without head pain. And a lot of doctors, neurologists, ENTs, vestibular therapists, they didn't know this. And so, because I wasn't having symptoms of head pain, no one was diagnosing me properly. So I got, diagnosed with things like anxiety. I got told I was depressed. I had a vestibular therapist tell me I had a potential parallel fistula and I would need a surgery that would leave me deaf. So a lot of different things were going on. And I was seeing some of like the top neurologists in Dallas, but I was having symptoms like vertigo, dizziness. I felt like I was walking on marshmallows. I had a lot of light sensitivity and sound sensitivity, which is a telltale sign that it was migraine going on in the background, but no one really picked up on that. And in a lot of studies you'll read for vestibular migraine, there's only a certain percentage of people that actually have head pain, but a lot do present without head pain as well. So I didn't really have a clear history of migraine, although after this came up, my parents were like, oh, yeah, we occasionally get ocular migraines and stuff like that. So I didn't even realize this was in my family. And I went out to the Mayo Clinic and I did about 2 days of testing. And during that time, the ENT walked in. He was like, well, you don't have a parallel fistula, but you have migraine. And I was like, what? How do I have migraine? Like, I always just thought migraine was just a really bad headache, like the majority of the world does. And as we all know, I mean, it's so much more than that. And so he kind of explained that to me. And during that process, I met my current neurologist, actually. His name is Dr. Shin Bei, and you may have read his book, Victory Over Vestibular Migraine, especially if you have this type of migraine. But he basically diagnosed me with the same thing. And I had heard about him. He was this dizzy doctor. And he used to diagnose unexplained dizziness. And so, oh, my son's going to bed. So we'll see him. He gets a little appearance right here. But he basically was in he had kind of developed his own method for diagnosing vestibular migraine. based on research and also what he was seeing at UT Southwestern at the time, which is a research clinic. And so he's done a lot of studies on vestibular migraine, which is nice. He's one of the few doctors that really specialize in it. So I got really lucky. He was kind of in my backyard. And we worked together on a treatment plan. And in this time, I kind of lost my job. I was in watch development, but I've always loved to cook, and I've taken culinary classes and programs all over the world, but I never really translated that into a career until I lost my job because of migraine. And I worked with Dr. Bay because I really wanted to get pregnant in the future, but a lot of medications you would have to wean off of and come back on. And I was concerned about trying to get on and off of these medications. And so one of the natural treatments we tried, he was like, you really have to, we can do these medications that are safe, but you really have to hit like the natural stuff very hard to try to do this instead of adding more medication. So one of the natural treatments we tried was diet. And I realized at the time, there wasn't a lot of research into diet and migraine, but the big one that was out there was the elimination diet, which is uh, endorsed by Johns Hopkins, and National Headache Foundation has a version, and there's a famous book called Kill Your Headache that has a version as well. That's pretty famous, and so a lot of these clinics were using this to help patients discover if they have food triggers. Now, not everyone will have food triggers, but this diet is kind of meant to calm down your brain and at the same time help you discover if you do have any food triggers. So it was a bit complicated to start, but once I got the hang of it, it really worked out well for me. I actually thought I didn't have any food triggers until about 2 months in. I was doing the diet pretty faithfully. And I remember not thinking I was seeing any big changes because I was dizzy every day. And I used to eat yogurt and nuts like every day. And I remember that night for dinner, I had tzatziki sausages, like yogurt based. And I thought, oh, I'm just fed up with this diet. I'm going to try it. And at dinner, I had like a massive vertigo attack. And I thought, oh my gosh, there might be something to this diet because I didn't realize I hadn't been keeping track well enough, but I didn't realize that I was actually, had not experienced a vertigo attack in months, but I was still having that daily like symptom of dizziness. So to me, I was just so focused on having daily symptoms that I didn't realize I was actually having a lot of improvement with like things like the vertigo or lower light sensitivity. And I think it's easy as a migraine patient to get caught up when you still feel bad every day, but you're not seeing like the forest through the trees. Like you're just kind of focusing on those symptoms every day that you feel and not really seeing those little wins along the way. And so that was kind of a moment of realization for me like, oh, everything I'm doing is actually working. It's just working very slowly and it's going to take some time. And so I decided to stick with it. And about 4 to 6 months in, I really started feeling better. And then about 6 to 8 months in, I felt confident enough to reintroduce foods because I was having like either totally dizzy free days or like very mild dizziness. And so I could really tell when things were a big trigger for me. So surprising ones ended up being like yogurt and nuts, which I used to eat daily, and I couldn't really tell that they were causing symptoms when I was having symptoms every day. So it becomes very clear as you begin to feel better, but it can be hard to decipher when you're in that 24/7 symptom uh, kind of a chronic migraine state. And so that's, I'm sorry, a very long version of my story, but I felt like a lot of important parts to it. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so I'll get started cooking, but feel free to ask me about that as we cook along.
Yeah, actually,
Um,
Caitlin did have a question about it. So
okay.
she has tried eliminating gluten and dairy, but hasn't noticed anything different. She does suffer from vestibular migraine, but she doesn't know if there's any correlation to food, and she's never had food sensitivities that she's aware of. But kind of sounds
Yeah.
like a similar story that you had, that you weren't aware either until you
Yeah.
did like a full elimination. Maybe how long did it take before you realized, like maybe before like the food had like exited the system? Like was it like how long does that
um
take?
It was really like as my combination of treatments started working. So it wasn't just the diet, it was like doing medication, supplements, like really a combined approach, which I know you guys really focus on at Mind Plus. And, you know, with gluten and dairy, it's really interesting because a lot of people suggest getting rid of it, but they're actually not a part of the standard migraine diet and they're not super common triggers.
Mhm.
They can actually be really good for migraine. Like in my newest book with Dr. Bay, we kind of talk about a migraine Mediterranean diet, and incorporating whole grains can actually be really great for your brain. Incorporating dairy every once in a while can be really good for your brain. And even like some of the studies, there was a new study that came out about using high omega 3s and balancing that with low omega 6s can actually help prevent and lessen migraine symptoms. But they used butter as a cooking, as one of their cooking bases when they were testing these patients. So, um, it where I see dairy and gluten be an issue is if people have an existing sensitivity. So, if you were naturally had an issue with gluten or dairy and you noticed it, that you didn't feel right on it besides migraine, I would say like that's something to avoid. But I did the same thing. I had functional doctors tell me to eliminate it, and I did it for like 6 months, and it made no difference for me too. It was the same thing for me with like paleo and whole 30. I eliminated all these things on these diets, and I wasn't making any improvement. And now I realize it was because nuts was one of my biggest triggers, but all the things that you sub when you're doing like dairy-free cooking is is nuts,
Yeah.
And so I was adding these things back in. I was feeling worse on these other diets, and that's what I really appreciated about these migraine diets that you will find is they really do hone in on some of those more common triggers that you would not realize, like things like citrus or bananas or nuts that can be really healthy in a average person's diet, but for people with migraine they do tend to trigger um, certain people like myself. So that's where it can be really good to start with an elimination and just see if you're sensitive to these things. And if you're not, just bring them back into your diet because there's no reason to eliminate them. Just because something is a common trigger doesn't mean it's going to be a trigger for you. Like I can tolerate chocolate, especially when my trigger load is low. So, that's something I've incorporated back into my diet, which is exciting. But I know that can be kind of a common trigger for some people too. On my website, I hear about bananas, especially ripe bananas, a lot, but I tolerate bananas fine. So this is where like that trial and error is is really good to start with, especially if you don't have an inclination to um, disordered eating or anything like that. If you do, I recommend either working with a dietitian to kind of work through this and make sure you have a healthy mindset, or to review my book, The Mediterranean Migraine Diet with Dr. Bay, and we kind of focus on foods that are just really good to incorporate for your brain. So that's my long answer to that question.
Mhm. Well, a
um,
short answer I can tell you, since hopefully you're all faithfully looking at your
yeah.
the Dizzy Cook cookbook, but on page 15 there's a list of foods to eliminate. So it kind of starts talking about an overall of different things to eliminate from the beginning of the journey.
Yeah. And
So you can always
my book, my book goes by what Johns Hopkins recommends. So it was reviewed by Dr. David Buckles and the team at Johns Hopkins. So that's what I really liked about this list, because you can find so many different lists on the internet, and they're not always accurate, or sometimes they're really restrictive. So that's what's really good about this list too. Okay, so keep asking me questions. I'm gonna walk through this really quick, get the soup started. To make this soup creamy, actually, without the dairy, we are going to first blend Great Northern beans with a cup of vegetable broth or chicken broth, whichever one you want to use. So I'm going to put those together, put it on my blender, and just blend it up, and that'll give us kind of like a creamy base without making it heavy or adding anything. So you can kind of see how that, I don't know if you can kind of see how that looks. But that'll just make our soup super creamy. And then with the other can of Great Northern beans, we're just going to rinse those and set them aside.
Did you not rinse that other can?
Yes. So I had these
Those are rinsed.
pre-rinsed and
Okay.
drained. A little issue. Some people with vestibular migraine or other vestibular issues do have a sensitivity to sodium. It's not a huge deal for people with migraine, but if that is you, I would try to look for low sodium beans. I generally try to do this anyway, because I like to add my own salt to everything. But if you can't find them, just rinse them really well under water and drain them. So I have my little colander here with the beans that I've rinsed and drained. And then I had rinsed and drained these that I blended with the broth. A note about broth as well. So I have the recipe in my cookbook for both chicken and vegetable broth, and you can definitely use those. If you're going very strict on this elimination diet, that's really the best way to go, is to make those in the Instant Pot and freeze them for later, especially because they don't contain onion. If you're like Alicia, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to make all my own broth. You do have a few options, but they're not completely elimination diet friendly. However, one of my favorites to use is this Trader Joe's organic hearty vegetable broth. So the great thing about this is, well, it's not low sodium at all, so that's something you have to watch, but it does only have onion powder in it, and I generally find most people can tolerate onion powder pretty well, as opposed to like onions cooked into things, or even raw onions tend to be more of a trigger for people. So again, it just depends on what works for you. If making your own broth all the time is going to stress you out, then try to find a good option like this that just doesn't have any MSG in it, no natural flavors, that sort of thing. That's things you want to look for on your broth. But this is a good one that I like to use a lot as a store-bought brand. So especially since I've reintroduced onions myself. So we have that going. We're going to set that aside. And then next we're going to work on all of our vegetables that are going into our pot. So I'm using a 3.5 quart pot, but you can also make this in a slow cooker. All you have to do is just dump all the ingredients, do the blending, and then just dump all of these ingredients in the slow cooker and cook it for about 2 to 3 hours on a low heat, and you would have a great dinner. If you don't want to sit here and wait for it, this will be a lot faster. It'll take about 30 minutes, but it's totally up to you. So we're going to chop our oh, I should probably say this. I couldn't find leeks today, so I'm actually using shallots instead. Shallots, a lot of people get confused about this. They're like, wait, we can't have onions, but we can have shallots. Shallots are not onions. They're a part of the same family. But we learned this in cooking school that they're actually more closely related to garlic. So how you can tell this too, which is kind of interesting, I have one here, but you can see they come like, you know how garlic has the different cloves? Like shallots have their own cloves too. And so they're very closely related to garlic. They can actually be a sub for garlic in some recipes. I find they have a very, even though I've reintroduced onions, I still love to cook with shallots because they have a very refined flavor to them. It's subtle, it's not like so in your face, and it has that touch of garlic to it that I really, really like. If you have trouble finding shallots, you could go with green onions or scallions, whichever one, and use that instead of the leeks as well. So you have three different options that work great in this recipe. I've used all three depending on what's available to me. It's totally up to you. So tonight I'm using shallots. So I'll show you how to trim these as I chop. And then I'll also show you how I like to chop them too. So I just trim the ends like this. If you're doing this with leeks, just trim off the top ends of the leeks, the really green ends you want to get rid of. You also want to be sure to dunk those in water because those tend to harbor a lot of sand in them before you chop them too. So I just make a slit along the side through the skin and peel off that outer layer of skin. And then you have your shallot. So another thing I like to teach in my cooking classes is how to hold your knife. I think a lot of us hold our knives like way back here and we chop like this. And you can see like I have no control over my knife. It would be really easy for me to cut myself versus putting my fingers up along the spine of the knife. This is how you can hold your knife with a little more stability, especially since a lot of knives have a very long handle. And, you know, a lot of us are cooking in the kitchen, have smaller hands. So this will give you a lot more control as you chop. And so if you're feeling dizzy or you're having a migraine day where you may find it hard to see, this can be a very important tip as you chop. So I am using about 3 shallots to sub for my 2 leeks here. If you're using green onion, I would say to substitute maybe about 4 stalks of green onion. And you can use the whole green onion in that too. So I'm just chopping these up really small. I'm going to add these to my pan with the olive oil to kind of get those going. If you are also using, another thing I don't have tonight is the poblano. We have a friend, her name is Rosa, and Rosa lives in Durango, or is from Durango, Mexico, and she brought me these dried pastilla peppers, which are basically dried poplanos. And I just drop one of these in the soup, and they will expand and give the same flavor and impart that flavor. And then I usually just take it out and chop it up. So if you have access to these, like let's say you can't find a fresh poblano, you could definitely use one of these instead. It just has so much flavor. Poblanos are usually less spicy, like probably the least spicy of all the peppers out there. But if you are sensitive to spice, which I am currently right now being pregnant, I can't tolerate a lot of jalapenos, so I'm going to leave that out. So Poblanos have just a hint of spice to them, but overall they're really, really mild. So you're just going to get that flavor mostly. So don't be intimidated about using poblanos, but if you are sensitive to spice, I would say completely leave out the jalapeno or maybe have some of the poblanos too. So we have that chopped. I'm going to chop my garlic too. Does anyone have any questions? Will we work through this? Easy way to peel your garlic, and most of you probably know, is just by smashing it. Good way to get out some aggression too.
Ooh, Krista has a question.
Hello. Probably not really a question, but I was feeling lazy today, so I figured I would share something that I did. After
Ooh.
I smashed the garlic, that I threw it in my blender with the beans, and I also cut my poblanos and jalapenos, just sliced them so you'd leave the ribs and the seeds in the inside and toss that. And I blended it all in my blender.
That's actually a great idea. If you're making this in the
Yeah.
crock pot, that's a great idea because you don't need to, sweat it in the oil first. Whereas with this one, you do get a little bit of extra flavor by cooking this in the oil first.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's a great shortcut, especially if you're doing this in the crock pot.
And I'll just say that you are not lazy because you're doing way more work than I am.
So I'm
Have
actually going to move. Oh, go ahead. I'm going to move you guys over to my stove really quick. So if you are sensitive to movement, just kind of look away from the screen for a little bit while I move you, and I'll let you know when everything's sat down. So do that really fast so you guys can see where I'm cooking. And then I'm going to bring everything over. See if I can set this up. Okay. All right. Hopefully that will work. Again, this is my 3.5 quart pot that I'm using, and I'm gonna bring over. See, I got all that. I got my spices out that you can bring over.
While you're grabbing all of that, Caitlin had a question about swapping out chicken and if it's okay to use quinoa in place of it. Does quinoa have protein?
So yes, quinoa actually is a good source of protein, especially from a grain. I would say that what I would probably do is cook it separately, because if you cook it in your pan, it's going to absorb a lot of that stock. So you may have to add additional stock. It's going to be a little harder to judge when the recipe is done. If you feel comfortable experimenting with it, go right ahead. I just don't have those cook times for it, but it's definitely going to soak up a lot of that liquid. So that's where I would just be a little cautious with completely replacing it. Oh, I need oil. Hello.
She says thank you.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, that would be really good mixed in, or just spoon the soup over top of it. It's a good source of plant-based protein. So we're gonna let that heat over medium heat. And then we're gonna add this in. Just bring that to a little sizzle and cook these for about a minute or two till they're softened and just really fragrant. And then I just have some roasted corn here that I'm going to use about a cup of. Let's talk about frozen versus canned, or fresh. Generally, they're all good to use. You could use fresh in this. You could use canned or roasted. What I like, or I'm sorry, frozen. what I like about using fresh or frozen is they generally have the lower sodium to them. So with cans, sometimes you can get that added salt. I also find the texture is better in frozen or fresh versus canned. But again, like, it's all about whatever works for you. So just make sure there's nothing added to it. It's just plain corn. And yeah, that's about it. So we're gonna cook this. If you have leeks, add in the leeks. If you're using green onion, add that in now, just with the chop, with the garlic too. You can hear it kind of sizzle. And yeah, we're gonna wait for that for a little bit. Make sure I have all my measurements right. Okay. I'm gonna work a little bit faster since we're running a little low on time. But I'm gonna add in my cup of corn. You could also add bell pepper to this. That would be great in here too. I'm trying to think of what else would be good. I'm just kind of gonna cook that down a little bit. And then we're gonna add 2 teaspoons of cumin. For the life of me, I can't figure out why they don't make bottles with bigger necks to them so you can actually stick in your measuring spoon. I tend to measure spices with my heart. Chili powder. So let's talk a little bit about chili powder. For this recipe, we're going to do about a teaspoon of it. What you need to look for when you're shopping for a chili powder is any added onion powder, as well as cocoa powder. So I've seen a lot of chili powders actually stick in cocoa powder to the ingredients. So if you're like, oh, I'm triggered by chili powder, just double check the ingredients and see if there's anything hiding in there that might be affecting you. And then we're gonna do smoked paprika. Add that in as well. I love smoked paprika because it has that really smoky flavor that's gonna come out when we cook the soup. And cooking this in the pan, it does have a more flavorful effect than just adding it to the slow cooker. Both are great. It just depends on how much energy you want to exert. But this will have a little bit more flavor than just adding it in because you are heating those spices and really, really activating those flavors. So we stir that together. Oh, go ahead.
Krista mentioned that too, actually, in the chat. She says she loves how you're blooming the spices in the oil with the leek. So blooming, that's a phrase I never heard before.
It does make a subtle difference. You know, some people are like, oh, that's silly, I'm not going to do that. So again, it just depends. You know, you can make it your own. It depends on how involved you want to be with in everything. So we got this simmering. I added my dried pepper here. If you're using the poblano and the jalapeno, make sure you add those in and kind of saute those until they soften as well. I don't have to worry about that since I'm using the dry. I'm going to add in my blended beans here to the soup. And then I'm also going to add my additional beans here. Stir those in. So you can see it's like super thick and creamy right now. And then we're just going to add additional broth to it. So you just want to add 3 more cups of broth to this. So it should take, if you are using store-bought broth, it should take the entire box of it, which is usually 32 ounces. Okay, so 4 cups total. We're just gonna stir that together. I'm gonna add a little salt. I usually like to add about a teaspoon of kosher salt. The kosher salt I get is called the Diamond brand. What's unique about Diamond brand, a lot of chefs like to use it, a lot of cookbooks. I know Ina uses it in her cookbooks. The difference between it and like other types of kosher salt like Morton's is they have finer crystals, and so you can use a lot more and have it be less salty. So in a lot of recipes, someone will say, oh, like that's too salty, or that's, you know, it's too much. It's probably because you're using the wrong kosher salt than what the cookbook is calling for. You try to make these little footnotes in the cookbook, but not everyone reads it before they make the recipes. So again, if you're having trouble, like if you think things are too salty or whatever, I would recommend looking for the Diamond Kosher Salt brand, or just taste like hold off on tasting it and or adding the salt until the end and adjust it to your preferences as well. So we got about a teaspoon in there. And I'm just gonna let this simmer while we work on our smoothie. And then after this simmers for about 30 minutes or so, I'm going to add rotisserie chicken to it. So you might cut that a little bit short, but I'll show you how to do that. And we'll come back to this. So if you are sensitive, I'm going to move you one more time, and I'll let you know when we're down. So moving. Okay. Move back to our original spot here. And I'm going to get out my other blender. Is that pretty clear on the soup? It's pretty easy. If you're making this in the slow cooker, I think I said it before, but just dump everything in and you can cook it on low for about like 2 to 3 hours, depending on your slow cooker. Mine cooks pretty quickly. You know your slow cooker best. Some people have to turn it to high, but I find that just like almost boils it on mine. So it's too much. Okay.
If somebody had like chicken breasts that were raw and they wanted to put that into the soup, should they put that in a pan right now or throw it in the oven, or what would you recommend?
I would actually just put it directly into the soup. It may need a little more time to simmer than just 30 minutes, but you can kind of check it and see. But it can cook along in the soup too. And then you can just take it out and shred it yourself on a cutting board and put it back in the soup. So that would work as well.
That's easy.
Yeah.
That's easy enough.
Yeah, so totally up to you, however you want to do it. Ways to make it cook faster. I mean, you can chop it into small chunks and simmer it in the soup that way, and it'll cook that way. You just won't get that like shredded chicken effect to it. So, but again, everyone has their preference for how they like things. So I like to give options. Okay, perfect. So you would notice that I blended the beans. So I have a few different blenders. So my top 3 blenders would have to be Ninja, NutriBullet, and Vitamix. There are other great blenders out there, but those are the 3 that I have personal experience with. I like the NutriBullet if you are cooking for 1, maybe 2 people. Just doesn't take up a lot of space, especially if you're living in an apartment. It blends really well. You can drink it right out of the cup. It's really, really good for smoothies. So if you are a smoothie lover, that's what makes you feel good during attacks. I would definitely invest in a NutriBullet. If you are a soup lover and you like to make things like sorbets, or you like to make things like the big pots of creamy soup, or you also like to make smoothies if you have a larger family, I would definitely advise going with a Vitamix. It is an investment, but if anything breaks, they will fix it for you. I've had to send mine back before. They'll fix it for you and send it back to you. So they have really good service on them. I've had mine like 10 years now. No, maybe a little bit less, maybe like 8 years now. And it is amazing. Like, it's seen better days. It's looked better, but I've only had to get it fixed once. So it still works great. I like to use it for smoothies, sorbets. It chops really well if you have anything super thick that you're trying to blend. Like, this doesn't hold up as well with it. So that's what I would recommend. It comes with, let's see, it comes with like a little tamper attachment that you can put in the top. So if you are making like ice cream or sorbet, you can kind of use it to blend the fruit a little bit better. So that's what I would recommend for those. But as someone with migraine, I think a good smoothie machine is like a great investment, because then you're not dealing with like chunks of ice and you're able to blend things. I do find that the NutriBullet, if you're sensitive to sounds, is a little bit quieter than the Vitamix, but I haven't tested. I mean, this is a pretty old one, so I'm not sure some of the new ones have sounds that are better about sound. I have found, I did do research for one reader who was really sensitive to sounds for blenders, and I wish I could remember which one we found, but I can't. So if that is you, I'll have to happily do the research again or try to pull up that email. But there are blenders out there that are good for people with sound sensitivity too. So
Krista
let's start.
had a quick tip. She said you can get refurbished Vitamixes and get it for a lesser cost if you are so inclined.
That is a great tip. Yeah, because technically mine's been worked on already too, and I think that's an awesome tip, because they can be expensive. Yeah, we registered for it when we got married, so that's how I remember how many years that is.
You celebrate your Vitamix's anniversary.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, so this smoothie is really popular. It kind of tastes like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That's what I really like about it. It's really simple ingredients. So I'll kind of walk you through why we use the ingredients we do and give you substitutions. I'm actually going to use frozen wild blueberries. So I got these at Trader Joe's. I just find Trader Joe's and Costco have the best deals on frozen fruit as opposed to like regular grocery stores, but whatever you find that works for you is great. I know groceries are very expensive right now, so we are all kind of hurting when it comes to that. So I like to give those little tips for what can be the most economical. So we're going to use 3/4 cup of frozen blueberries. Now I'm using wild blueberries. Wild blueberries tend to be they're smaller than normal blueberries, and they tend to be a little more tart. It's just a flavor preference for me, but again, you can go with whichever ones you really like. I love wild blueberries in smoothies, and I like to use the normal blueberries for like pies and stuff like that. But if you're doing a pie, like sometimes the mixture of the two can be really, really delicious too. I have a recipe for a crustless blueberry pie on my website where I've used a mixture of both of them, and it's fantastic. So, okay, so we're going to use the frozen blueberries here. And then I'm going to add, okay, so let's talk about what we can add to the smoothie too. So, especially for protein, and this isn't in the recipe, but if you are going to use protein, let me go get out my options of a few things I like to add, or just keep on hand for smoothies. So a few things you can add for protein if you're making this, like if it's not a snack, you're making this in the morning for breakfast or something like that, you want to add a little bit of protein to it. So I always keep a jar of chia seeds. These are actually really good, high in omega-3s, so really good for your brain. You can use some of those. Hemp seeds, I have it in an old Mayo bottle, but hemp seeds are really great too. Another great brain food. They can pack a lot of protein as well, especially if you're not using hemp milk. And those you can find at a lot of different grocery stores. And then if you want to add a lot of protein, like say a protein powder, but you're eliminating nuts, whey proteins, even collagen proteins, like that's something that triggers me as well. So protein powders can get a little tricky when it comes to migraine. I like this pumpkin seed protein. This is from Sprout Living. Like the only ingredients are cold pressed pumpkin seed. So this works well for me. I tend to be very sensitive to other types of protein powder. I can't do pea protein, can't do collagen protein. So this is one I really like to tolerate. I tolerate really well, especially if you're sensitive to. And this is about 20 grams of protein in each serving too. So you can add that to it. Since I'm just going to make this tonight, we're already eating a different dinner. I'm just going to leave everything out. I might add a little bit of chia seeds, but again, you don't have to. I also really like to make this for my son, so I'll usually leave out the protein powder if I'm going to do that for him too. Okay, so we kind of discussed that. We're going to add a little bit of the sun butter. So this is sunflower seed butter. It's a substitute for nut butters as well as peanut butter. So we're going to add 2 tablespoons of that to this smoothie.
We were talking a little bit about that before we got started, and somebody mentioned they found it at Meijer, so it's pretty readily available, even if you're not looking for it. It's out there.
I definitely think more people are getting more accepting of like allergy friendly things. So this is the brand I get. I like you can get the organic. I like to get the kind without the salt, but there are a few different types out there. I also like a brand called 88 Acres. If you want like fancy seed butters, they're the people to go to. You can find those at Whole Foods and online. But yeah, it's pretty readily available. Sometimes you can even find pumpkin seed butter, which is really delicious too. So I do find that sun butter varies in taste. So a lot of people who hate sun butter, I would just recommend trying a different one because different brands are totally different. I've had some that are terrible. I like this one personally, but I would try a few before you write it off completely, is my point. I think you have that with peanut butter or any kind of nut butters, though, you know, everyone has that issue. So added the sun butter here. We're going to talk a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of vanilla. So half a teaspoon of vanilla. I just got this one at Costco. I don't love it. Generally, I like to buy alcohol-free vanilla, which again, you can get this at Trader Joe's for a good price, but you can get it other places too. That one I like for smoothies just because you don't have like that kind of alcohol flavor to it. For baking, it's fine, but for smoothies, I think it's got a more mild flavor to it, which I like better for adding to smoothies. But this is just what I have on hand. We are also going to talk about mulberries. So one thing that's really tricky when you start a migraine diet is substituting bananas in smoothies because there's such a big component of so many smoothies, like hard to find smoothies without bananas. And they have a great flavor to them. They add some sweetness, they add some creaminess to it. And so if you are missing bananas, I highly recommend trying to find mulberries. Usually in the Northeast, they're pretty easy to find. I can get these at most health food stores, so like places like Sprouts, Whole Foods, any kind of local health food store that you have. They look like this. See right there? They're just dried. They have kind of like a butterscotch flavor to them, and so I find it really reminiscent of bananas too. They add a lot of great sweetness. They're actually a really good superfood. They're good for your brain too. So I like to add these to the smoothies if you're missing bananas. If you can't find these, another type, not that it would be easier to find, but another kind of low glycemic index thing that you can add is called Lucuma powder, Lucuma. Again, you can find this online as well, but it has a low glycemic index, so it's not going to spike your blood sugar the same as like a banana would or like high sugar fruit. And it also has like that kind of butterscotch flavor to it as well that goes really nice in smoothies like this. So that's another banana sub I like. If you're looking for a little bit of creaminess that you're not getting, I gotta turn down my heat a little bit. Definitely not simmering, it's boiling. If you're looking for a little bit of creaminess that the blended banana adds, what I like to do is add a little bit of riced frozen cauliflower to it. You have to be careful because you don't want that overwhelming taste of cauliflower, but just like a quarter cup of it is really effective at adding a little bit of creaminess. We can also do that with the milk. So for this milk, I'm actually using flax and oat milk. Again, this has a good amount of omega-3s in it too. It's not my favorite milk that I've ever tried. I'm just testing this one to see if I like to recommend it. This is called plant Malibu milk. I don't know. I'm testing a few. I generally like to use some kind of oat milk, but it's really up to you. You can use regular milk. You can use whatever milk is your favorite in this. And we're going to add about 3/4 cup to that. I think I got everything in there. Yes.
So Anne Marie had a
Okay.
good tip in the chat. She says that she found mulberries on Amazon and it was a really large bag and it was reasonably priced. So there's another
Good.
source for that.
Yes. Amazon, man, they have it all, don't they? Okay, so because this has a lower amount of frozen fruit in it, I'm just going to add a little bit of ice to it. Generally, you can use, generally smoothies with frozen fruit don't always need it, but I like to have a little bit extra. So I'm going to blend this together. If you are sensitive to sounds, please just mute me for a second while I blend this all. Okay, there we go. We perfect sun butter and jelly smoothie. So good. I might have this for this looks really good.
Do the
Okay, so
chia
this,
seeds get blended too, or do they kind of just float around in there?
no, they definitely get blended in there. Yeah. I don't know if you can see, but it's pretty smooth,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how you blend it. Yeah, it's pretty good. Oh my gosh, so good. I forgot how good that smoothie is. Sometimes I don't, you get tired of making your recipes all the time for testing, and then you don't make them for a while, and you're like, oh, that's a really good recipe.
If I do say so myself.
Yeah, pat on the back. So we're gonna kind of skip ahead just really quickly. Oh, to talk about rotisserie chicken. If you're not already using chicken, raw chicken that you cut up in your pot, this can be kind of tricky to find. I admit I'm a little spoiled here in Dallas. We have a lot of options. Again, like health food stores, Sprouts, Whole Foods, Fresh Market. I'm trying to think of where else people have found them before. I have a really nice grocery store here called Central Market. It's part of HEB, and they're only in Texas, but they have a lot of really good products. And so they're traditional. I love to get their rotisserie chickens. They're reasonably priced, and their chickens are what I call like naked chickens, where they don't add a lot of ingredients to them, a lot of spices and everything like that. And you just really want to read the ingredient labels if you're buying rotisserie chickens, because places like Costco, Tom Thumb, Safeway, I think I haven't been able to find them there. They always add some kind of MSG, a lot of different flavorings to it, a lot of additives to it, and there's just no reason to have that in your rotisserie chicken at all. It's kind of sad that they do that, but those tend to be a lot of common migraine triggers, so it's just something to watch for. It can make your life a lot easier to have these to buy. You can also make them at home. I have a great recipe in this cookbook as well, for roast chicken, or you can just use one of those and make it on a Sunday. Use it throughout the week, pick it off, freeze it, that sort of thing. I need my cutting board. Let me go grab that really quick so I can show you guys how to do this. But just something to watch for when you're buying chicken. You never think that you would have to do that until you start having these kind of health issues, and really having to watch what kind of things you use, which is crazy. But I've gotten a lot of friends buying naked chickens just based off of my experience too. So whether or not you've made your own, or you are just doing this with a rotisserie chicken from the store, basically how you want to pick this apart is you can remove both the legs like this, and then pick off that dark meat here. Remove it from the bone, just start to shred it. And then put any, extra little bits aside. So I won't go through the whole thing, but I just kind of want to show you how to pick apart a chicken and pick the meat off. The dark meat is obviously going to be a little more flavorful, so it's really good for soups. I don't always love like the slimier texture, so I really like to use it in soups because you chop it up and you don't really notice it, and you get that great flavor. So it's really good in a recipe like this. The chicken breast part I really like to use for sandwiches throughout the week. So like easier sandwiches. And that way you're not dealing with deli meat with sulfites and all that sort of thing, which can also be fairly common triggers as well. And then you can just take your knife along the bone to cut off the breast here. And that just kind of peels right off. You can just remove this meat and set it aside, whether you're making sandwiches or whatever. And after you remove the meat, save the bones from it like this. If you don't want to make stock right away, you just put it in a little baggie, put it in the freezer until you're ready to make it. Drop it in your Instant Pot with some vegetables and water. You have your own homemade broth, low sodium, no MSG, and you kind of get a 2-for-1 deal with what you spent on the chicken. So you get a whole nother thing that you can use for this recipe if you want, or just on sick days, you don't feel well, nauseous. You know, that's how you can reuse, make the most of your chicken. So I hope that was helpful. Once I get this all picked, I'm going to chop it up and mix it into my soup, and then you're ready to go, basically. So that's our whole class. If anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to help. Is there anything else that I maybe missed?
Somebody's typing something, so.
I'm sure y'all are just ready to eat, ready to get going, but I hope this was very helpful. Gave you lots of ideas.
Yeah, I never considered substituting cauliflower as for a banana. Like that's so interesting to me that the texture would turn out creamy.
Yeah, I mean, you do need the sweetness from it because obviously cauliflower is not the same flavor as the banana, but that's where the mulberries really help and the lucuma powder. What each one you use. I don't know. I've had some people say, "Oh, I can still taste the cauliflower." So, again, take it with a grain of salt. But usually, if you use a lower amount of cauliflower, yeah, it gets like really thick and creamy, which is kind of nice. So, actually, I use it in the acai smoothie in this cookbook as well. If you do the acai bowl, it's in there too. So, yeah, we got
Nice.
everything.
Krista mentions that you can also freeze the leeks or other vegetables that you're working with for the soup that you're not using in the soup. And you can just freeze that all together. So then you can throw it all together in the Instapot when you're ready
That's a great idea.
to make your own broth.
Yes.
Or what is the difference between a stock and a broth? Is there any difference or is it just called something?
Usually with the stock, it's simmered a little bit longer and it uses all the bones too. But yeah, it tends to have a little more flavor than broth, but it's I use them interchangeably a lot in cooking. So
Okay,
I
good
don't
to
think
know.
it's a huge deal. Yeah. So I'm gonna keep picking this, but if there's
So
not
there's
any more
another
questions.
There
Oh, go
is
ahead.
another question from Anne Marie. She says, "Why kosher salt instead of sea salt? Is there a difference there?"
Yeah, so there is a difference. So sea salt does have very large crystals to it. So sea salt tends to be better as a finishing salt. I know a lot of people like to use Himalayan sea salt and use that with a grinder in recipes. Again, it's one of those things that you're just going to have to, if that's something you're really a fan of, you're just going to have to test out the flavors in it because it's not always a one-to-one substitute with like what the recipe is calling for. But that's kind of why kosher salt is just very widely used in cooking. And so when a lot of recipes call for it, they're looking at a certain amount of that saltiness that you're going to get from the size of the crystals that you're using. So if you do sub sea salt, which tends to be a finishing salt on the end of the dish, or like you'll top it with brownies or like caramels or that sort of thing, they just tend to be used a little bit differently. So you have to watch those amounts.
I guess it kind of makes sense if you're thinking about like the granular amount and like how it kind of works its way throughout the recipe. And if it's a bigger one, it's not going to make it as far. It gets
Exactly.
kind of
Like
like that.
like table salt. Like if you used half a teaspoon of table salt, just interchangeably for kosher salt, you're going to end up with a super salty recipe. So that's why it's just really important to pay attention to what they're calling for in the recipe, or to just taste test it on your own. The only bummer about that is you don't get things flavored kind of along the way. But if you're subbing it out and it's your first time doing it, that's what I would recommend doing, is just waiting till the end.
Caitlin has a question or something.
Yes,
Thanks.
thanks. I was just curious if you have any tips about eating out. I'm finding that, pretty much everywhere I go has like onions in something, or certain cheeses in something, or like salad dressings. Like I try to remember to
Yeah.
bring my own, but sometimes that's just like not doable if I, you know what I mean? Like it's just
Yeah.
complicated. And yeah, I'm just having a really hard time finding menu items that I like feel with confidence are free of the trigger foods.
About eating. So that's the thing, is like, I mean, eating out is always going to be a risk. It's kind of one of those things that you just have to weigh when you do it. So see how you feel, how full your trigger bucket is. Like if it's a week with a lot of bad weather, if you're really stressed out, let's say it's around the holidays, probably not a time you want to eat out a lot and take those risks. If you are having a better week, if you're a little more stable with things, you feel confident in your treatment plan, that's where eating out, you can get a little more liberal with what you choose. Um, if you're trying to follow the migraine diet strictly, what I would say is I have a post on my website. I don't know if you've already seen it, but it does have different um, restaurants that you can go to, and kind of at least the ones that post their ingredients, which are normally like fast food restaurants. So places like Chipotle actually have really good ingredients that are pretty migraine friendly. So that's kind of a quick place that I pick up from a lot of times. If you're going to like a nicer restaurant, usually burgers are a pretty safe bet, or like any kind of grilled meat and just like steamed or grilled vegetables. Those would probably be the safest choices. Again, I get messages from people who are like, what do I order on my anniversary? And, they're going to this really nice French restaurant with all the sauces and everything. And so whenever I go out to a place like that, I just see it as an experience. And even with migraine, living with migraine, it has to be a balance. You're not always going to be perfect about everything. And we still have to enjoy life a little bit. So as long as you're not doing this, 2, 3 times a week, but instead, maybe once a month, or maybe 2 times a month or something like that, go enjoy yourself and just make the best decision you possibly can for you. So what I'll kind of do is look at a menu and be like, okay, this has yogurt sauce in it. Obviously, I'm avoiding that. This looks like it has fewer risk to me, knowing like what I know about myself. and my personal triggers. So that's what I'll go with. Anything with nuts or yogurt is usually out for me. So that's what kind of guides my choices. Obviously, this gets easier as you discover if you have any food triggers and what they might be. But again, just make the best choice you can with the information you have. And if it's stressing you out a lot, you kind of have to weigh what is more important, because a migraine diet like shouldn't be, stressful, because then you are opening yourself up to getting attacks, and you're not really helping yourself all that much by being stressed out by something. So it's a little bit of a balance. So that would be my recommendation. I know it's not clear cut and easy to say, but again, if you're just doing this like once or twice a month as like a celebration meal or something like that, then I wouldn't worry about it as much. If you're going out more often or you travel a lot, I would definitely review that post on my website. If you just search Dizzy Cook dining out or something like that, it should pop up on Google, and it'll give you some suggestions there too.
Yeah, that's a good point, Alicia. If you want to tell people where they can find you if they're interested in learning more, besides the cookbook.
Yeah, besides the cookbook, I'm on most social media. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can find me at the Dizzy Cook. It'll pop up. I have a lot of YouTube videos actually, especially if you are a vestibular patient. I have some videos with Dr. Cho, who's an ENT, and he talks a little bit about triple PD and Meniere's disease. So if you have those crossovers, some good videos on that on there, as well as some videos where Dr. Bay and I go through some of the treatments that have worked for me. So like Gamma Core is one where I posted about me using Gamma Core as my new preventative treatment. So there's a lot of helpful videos on there. I don't know if they have a messaging area. I'm also at alicia@thedizzycook.com. So you can email me as well. So there's lots of different ways to get in touch. I am giving birth in like 3 weeks, so might be out of commission for at least a month or two, but I'll be back. And I love to do these cooking classes. They're really, really fun. I generally do them towards the end of the year when people are really interested in cooking. But we'll probably schedule some a little bit later in the year, maybe do like a grilling class or something like that. Or if we
Yeah, that's a
do
great
another one with
idea.
Mind Plus, that would be great too.
For sure. I like the idea of a grilling class.
Yeah, grilling is really intimidating to a lot of people, but what's kind of nice about it is if you're really sensitive to smells, you don't have to, cook things all day in the kitchen. You can leave it outside, and that can be helpful as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. Is there anything else?
Does anybody feel brave enough to show their work?
Guess I should probably show you guys mine, but I won't walk you over there.
Yeah, let's see what it looks like,
Awesome.
and maybe toss some chicken in there, see how that goes.
Oh yeah, sure. So let me chop this up a little bit more. Just kind of run my knife through it. I'm gonna save some of this for lunch. This is actually a knife that it's made in Texas by a local knife maker. He makes a lot of knives for the chefs around here, and my husband got it for me when I got this cookbook deal. He has it like a little gift, and it's perfectly fitted to my hand. So it's really easy to cut with, which is awesome. So if you ever have that luxury, highly recommend. But having a really sharp, good knife is just so essential, I think, to cooking with migraine, because we don't often think about sharpening our knives. But it can, especially if you're starting to cook a lot more, these days on a migraine diet, it can really make a difference with how easy it is to cook for you. So take a lot of stress and pain away by using a good knife. A lot of places like Williams-Sonoma, I'm going to move this. So if you get dizzy, just FYI, we're going to move back over to the oven area. You can see mine simmering away here. Gosh, I'm like so afraid this is going to fall right into my soup. Okay. You can see my pepper has really softened up. So you can either chop this up if you like things a little more spicy, or just take it out. Totally up to you. You can see it's nice and thick and creamy. And then I'm going to add that chicken to it. You can get your knife sharpened. You can do it at home, but another place to get it sharpened, like Sur La Table or Williams-Sonoma, I think they'll charge you like, I don't know, your first knife is free, and then it's like $5 a knife or something like that. So if you just have a like really solid chef's knife, it'll just make like such a difference in how you like to cook. Just promise me y'all will sharpen your knives at some point in 2023.
Mhm. It's a good resolution.
Yeah, and this is kind of what it looks like. But I love that those blended beans, they get it really thick and creamy here. And it smells, oh my gosh, it smells amazing. So you can serve this with tortilla, crushed corn chips, tortilla chips on top would be amazing. If you've either reintroduced avocado or you can tolerate avocado, that would be great on top of this. I like to just serve it with like a simple side salad. Trying to think of what recipe would go. I think I have like a zesty ranch recipe in that cookbook. That would be really good with this too. So you can make like a little taco salad with it too. That would be delicious. Yeah. I hope everyone enjoyed.
Yes, a lot of people have been commenting in the chat. A lot of thanks from Madeline and Krista and Danielle and
Perfect.
Anne Marie. Anne Marie says that the soup is really good and she loves the smoothie and she's excited to try other recipes from the book.
Awesome. That's good. I know that smoothie. I was like, oh, that's delicious. I'm really enjoying that
Surprisingly
tonight.
refreshing.
Yeah, I don't usually make smoothies in the evening. So yeah, that was a nice surprise.
And Krista offers that her knives, that she agrees that it's super important to keep them sharp, and that there are a lot of places around here that you can get it done,
Oh,
and
good.
that it's definitely safer than cutting with a dull knife because it's easier to cut yourself that way.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you get dizziness with your attacks or that head pain is just super strong. Like you want to cut down on your chances of injury as much as you can. So that's a great way. I know it seems counterintuitive to have really sharp knife, but it does work better if you have the proper holding of it too. Yeah, really important. So local places, that's great. You should drop that in the chat, or maybe you guys have like a group chat or something like that. That would be great.
I think Wauwatosa, I remember back in the day anyway, they used to have a knife sharpening place just at a public market. Like just what am I trying to think of? Like just like when they have their open air fair, like this
Oh,
they just have
yeah.
a vendor that just is there. Krista did post a picture of her soup and she says that her husband's enjoying it with tortilla chips.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
great. And if it does tend to thicken as it cools, so you can always add more broth to it if you need it the next day. I find if you microwave it sort of thins out a little bit, or you can reheat it on the stove. But if you need a little bit more, just add more broth to it. I think that's all my tips. I'm out of tips.
Then she posted a picture, Moletta, that's a brand of a knife?
Okay, perfect.
I guess. And she's typing something else. Well, thank you for all of the tips, and it was so helpful. And like, there's just so much to contemplate when it comes to cooking and techniques, and the types of food that you choose can all make such a difference at the end of the day. And it's helpful to have a guide in all of it because it can be pretty complicated. So thank you for sharing today.
For sure. Yeah. And this recipe, it normally takes about maybe 30 minutes to put together total. We were talking a lot and everything throughout, but you could make both of these recipes in no time at all. So, really, really quick and easy. I know we've been on here for an hour and a half, but without all the chatting, I promise it takes a lot less time.
So moletausa.com is I guess that's the place where she gets her knives sharpened, an artisanal
Okay.
sharpening space. And it does look like they are there's a picture of them like in an outdoor fair type setting. So,
Oh, perfect. That's
um
awesome.
she says to check their website to find out where they're near you.
Okay.
She sees them in the Lake Country area, but I'm sure they travel. So, cool.
Thank you for the tip. That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, all right. Thank you for all of the tips, Alicia. And I guess we're wrapping up.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me. I hope you all enjoy.
Thank you so much. Thanks again for being here. And thanks everybody for coming.
Bye.
Bye.